And good evening from the beautiful Rhinehart Music Center on the campus of Indiana University-Purdue University, Fort Wayne. And welcome to the second of 3 debates for the U.S. Senate, sponsored by the Indiana Debate Commission. I'm your moderator, John Schwantes. Now, this is the Northern Indiana debate. The first debate, the Central Indiana debate, took place 11 days ago. The third and final debate will be in Southern Indiana, and it's coming this next Monday, and that's October 25th in Vincennes, Indiana. Now, if you'd like more information on that event, please go to the website indianadebatecommission.com. As for this debate tonight, for the next 60 minutes or so, the voters will be asking the questions. The voters sitting here in our audience tonight. And while they're asking their questions, I'm sure their fellow Hoosiers will be listening and watching to dozens of radio and television outlets and many websites across the state, drawing their conclusions about the responses offered by the candidates. The candidates drew lots for lectern position tonight and also for the order in which they will answer questions. So immediately next to me this evening is Libertarian Rebecca Sink-Burris. In the middle is Republican Dan Coates, and on the far end is Democrat Brad Ellsworth. Now, the candidates and their campaigns have agreed to the rules for tonight's debate. Here's a very quick overview. For the most part, the candidates will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer most of the questions. I say most because I may, if the logistics require, adjust the timing of one response to allow the candidates enough time to answer a general final question. Also, as moderator, I may cut off a candidate who has exceeded his or her time limit or call for additional time to allow a candidate to more fully explain an answer. As I mentioned earlier, the questions came from Hoosier voters and were reviewed by a committee of the Debate Commission. The candidates know to use only small notes and no props. And before this broadcast began this evening, we reminded our live audience here in Fort Wayne about the House rules as well. So, at this point, let's begin with the candidates, each having 30 seconds simply to introduce themselves. We will start with Rebecca Sink-Burris.
Good evening. In politics this year, there has been a strong sentiment to vote the bums out. But the older parties haven't listened. Instead of new voices, they've given us voices from the past, voices preferred by party leadership, not the voters. As your Libertarian candidate, I represent the kind of change that people have been asking for. I represent the ideals of our founding fathers, the ideals that made our country great.
Dan Coates.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here this evening to discuss issues of importance to our nation and to our state of Indiana. I passionately believe that the leadership of Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, supported by my opponent, is taking our country down the wrong track. If I'm elected, I will make different choices. I will fight to work to get us back on the right track, to get Hoosiers back to work. If we want to change America, we have to change direction. I will fight for that change.
And Brad Ellsworth.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank our audience and Debate Commission for sponsoring this. I've had a great time traveling the state of Indiana over the last 8 months campaigning for this seat. I've listened to Hoosiers, and here's what they tell me. Come home often and listen to us. Serve us and not special interests. Tell the truth, use common sense, and work together, Republicans and Democrats, for us, the people back home in Indiana and in this country. If I'm elected, that's what I'll do.
Well, we promised you questions from the voters, and that's where we'll get started now. First up, Kelly Scott is a business intelligence consultant from Ingalls. Kelly, we thank you for joining us this evening. What is your question for the candidates?
Good evening. I'd like to ask you where you stand on fair tax, where everyone pays the same rate on what they purchase, abolishing the income tax.
Wonderful question. If you haven't looked at the fair tax, Please check out their website, fairtax.org. It's a wonderful idea. Our tax system right now punishes the very things that we need to grow the economy. The fair tax undoes that and very much lifts the burden of taxation off the backs of low-income wage earners who are often paying more in payroll taxes than they do in income taxes. It has such advantages for job growth, it's almost unbelievable. Truly, within 10 years, wage earners would be earning 40% more than they are now. Our economy can be expected to grow at 10% year after year. This is a wonderful idea to simplify our tax code, make it fair, make it something you can see, something you can touch. It makes it visible how much you're paying and how it's being paid. And it's been studied for 15 years. The economists who are familiar with it continue to tout it as the biggest jobs program that we could ever have. And that really is the most important issue right now, is getting America working. And our tax policies right now stop that. For one thing, we have the second highest business taxes in the world. And that is sending labor and capital outside of this country. We need those jobs to come back, and the fair tax will bring jobs back to this country, as well as allowing more jobs to be produced right here by entrepreneurs.
All right, Dan Coates.
Thank you, Kelly. This tax code that we have to deal with now is so complex that we all have to send it off to an accountant or a lawyer or tax preparer to even begin to figure out how to file for our taxes. I think we need fundamental tax code reform. We need fairer, flatter, simpler. There are a number of provisions out there that are proposals out there that I think are sensible to take a look at. One thing we shouldn't do is adopt what Europe has done, and that is a VAT tax. It's a hidden tax that adds price to the product as it's developed. And I have seen those introduced in Europe during my tenure over there. Starts out very innocently, 1%, 2%. When we left Germany, it was 20%. People say, oh, we don't pay tax. It's built into the price of the product. We can't let ourselves get into a situation where the government or the Congress will add a tax and not take away from that to balance it out. Yes, if we could repeal parts of that tax code, perhaps the income tax, and replace it with something fair and flatter and simpler, I'm all for it. What I don't want to do is get tricked into a situation that happens so often in Congress, and that is they add something, oh, it's just going to go for this purpose, it's just a little percent here and there, and then you end up with an additional tax. We're taxed way too much in this country.
And Brad Ellsworth.
Thank you very much, Kelly. That's a great question. You know, every year Beth and I sit down at the kitchen table. She does more than I do, and figure our own taxes. We buy the big, thick book you've seen every year, get out the pencils and pencil sharpener and try to do our own taxes. We're successful at it, but we know how hard that is. And I can only imagine that owning a business would be even tougher. You know, because we do that, I was comfortable in releasing my tax returns so that the public could see where I made my money, how I paid that. As far as I know, I'm the only candidate on the stage that has done that and released that publicly and not refused to do that. But getting back to the question, we have to simplify our tax code. I've met with the folks from the Fair Tax Division. I've talked to them. It is a very interesting concept. I have not signed on to legislation yet, as many congressmen and senators have not yet. But we do have to simplify the tax code. People should know and businesses should know what they have to pay on a percentage. You shouldn't have to have an accountant to do a very simple tax form in this country. So I'm willing to look at anything so that Hoosiers know what they pay in taxes, so that businesses know what they pay in taxes, and they know what to expect for years to come so that they can plan ahead like we like to. Thank you.
All right, our second question this evening comes from Larry Sellers, a retiree from Frankfurt. Now, Larry couldn't be with us this evening, so I will read his question. Do you think the war on terror, Al-Qaeda, is a success, or do you think we need to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan? I know that we have spent, or should I say borrowed, a heck of a lot of money to pay for these two wars. I want to know if you think that it was a wise decision to borrow the money to pay for those two wars, and how would you have voted to change that? And this question goes first to Dan Coates.
Larry, this is a very good question, and I think very much on people's minds here in Indiana. However, it has taken second place to the economic concerns that we're dealing with and getting people back to work. Nevertheless, we live in a dangerous world. We have seen what the effect of terrorism can be on our own shores. We know that there are threats to our country that are alive and well and being planned. We've stopped many of them. It's going to be difficult to stop all of them. So the answer that I have to you is yes, I think we need to continue to fight the war on terror. We have two choices. We can either withdraw and wait for them to attack us again, or we can take the attack to them. That's what we're doing in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's not easy. Our young people are sacrificing themselves. We need to honor that sacrifice. We need to support them fully. This is a challenge to the world. It's more than just the United States. But this terrorism that's taking place around the world and the people who want to kill us, take down our economy, they are plotting and planning. I want to take the attack and the fight to them rather than wait for another hit on the United States, which potentially could include weapons of mass destruction and be much more destructive than even 9/11.
Brad Ellsworth.
Thank you, Larry. It's a great question. I don't think it's any accident that this country has not successfully been attacked again. I think that our soldiers and our intelligence officers that work around the clock have done a great job of keeping us safe, and we have to keep that up. But I did say 4 years ago when I ran for Congress that it was time to start turning the security of Iraq back over to the Iraqis, not with a drop-dead date or a timeline to get out, but to start to wean them off of our assistance, training them up, and then making them take responsibility for their own country. I think it's the same in Afghanistan, that we've put the troop in. I support that. I trust our generals and our president to make that decision. But at some point, the Iraqis and the Afghanis have to take control of their own country. Again, I want to keep our country safe. I'll fight to keep our country safe, and I'll supply our troops with everything they need to do their job and then come home safely. And when their veterans come home, we have to go after terrorists where they are. But again, the two countries you mentioned, Iraq and Afghanistan, at some point will have to take control of their own destiny, and that will be shortcoming. Thank you.
And Rebecca Sink-Burris.
9/11 changed everything. And we have to take that into account in our military strategies. Clearly, the Cold War is over, and terrorism presents a totally different kind of threat to our country. It's a threat that is not likely to be solved by large armies crossing borders. I think it's time to change the terminology and not call this a war on terror, but a strategy to deal with terrorism, because it can be dealt with successfully. Currently, having troops in the Middle East is actually provocative to terrorists. And we have made our point over there quite clearly that we're not going to stand for a country attacking us or for terrorists being harbored within a country to attack us. And it is time to start removing our troops, as we have done, from those areas. But there's a larger question, too, about our military spending and how we utilize our military today. We still have troops in countries like Germany, like Japan, like South Korea, as if we're still fighting the Cold War. Those countries really do not need us to protect them. They need to step up to the plate and fund that for themselves. That way we could do a better job of protecting America from terrorists and focusing on that clear danger to our country.
All right, our next question this evening comes from Annette Leisure. Annette is a U.S. Navy retiree from Indianapolis. Annette, we thank you for making the drive to Fort Wayne. What is your question for the candidates?
Good evening. I'm a disabled veteran who retired, like you said, from the military in 2006. I received disability payments, and those payments that I received for my service-connected disabilities are in turn deducted from my retirement check. So in essence, I'm funding my own disability. I would like to know, as a veteran, what specific steps will you take to ensure that this unjust, unethical practice is no longer carried out on our state and country veterans?
And this goes first to Brad Ellsworth.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for your service to our country, and God bless you for your service to keeping us all safe. I have sponsored the piece of legislation to go and correct that in the House, and I'm proud of that. I received the Veterans of Foreign War PAC committee endorsement because of my strong stance on our military. I serve on the Armed Services Committee in the House, and so daily work with our veterans. But when you serve our country and you're willing to put your life on the line for our freedoms, you should be rewarded with make the promise that when you come home, and especially in a disabled state, that we take care of you, and you should not be funding your own pension and or your own disability. And so I hope that we can get that passed through. It should have gone through. You should never have to worry about this. And as soon as we get back, we'll push this forward because, again, thank you for your service to this country. It's the most special thing that anybody can do for us, and in turn, we should not make you suffer like you are. Thank you.
Rebecca Sink-Burris.
National defense being one of the core duties of the federal government, there is no excuse whatsoever for not taking care of returning veterans, disabled or not. And the first question, we were talking about the fair tax, that would actually eliminate that problem because people would not be taxed on their income, they would not be taxed on their Social Security benefits or retirement benefits, they would only be taxed above the poverty level for what they spend for new goods and services. So we would not get this kind of double and, in many cases, triple taxation that we're experiencing now. As to other promises that need to be kept for our veterans, we need to make sure that medical care is funded as promised and that the pensions are funded as promised. And that has been a problem with government at different levels in the past and currently. And I would certainly, the fair tax I think will help on this, but I think it's very important to make sure that our veterans are taken care of. You know, no debt is greater than what we owe to people who have served our country in that capacity. And I would work for that tirelessly.
And Dan Coates.
Well, I served in the military and certainly understand the issues that affect veterans. Also, when I served in Germany as ambassador, we made many, many trips to Landstuhl to visit with the troops that had been brought back, some very seriously injured in Iraq. So our veterans need to be honored, they need to be respected, they need to be given the dignity of support. When they come back, they put their lives on the line and sacrifice their careers in many instances, those who are called up from reserves and guard. So I do think we need to be very careful how we treat our veterans and make sure that we provide for the services that are appropriate. I have not been in Congress for the last 12 years. I've not read Congressman Ellsworth's bill. I've not looked into this particular problem. I also served on the Armed Services Committee in the United States Senate. These are issues that we would deal with, and I promise you, if elected, I would be happy to try to look into this situation, find out what it is, not only as it affects you or someone else, what is the rationale for this, what are the details behind this. I just simply cannot give you a firm yes or no at this point without knowing more about the particulars of this particular legislation.
All right, and we move now to another one of our voters with us this evening, James Adding. He is a Fort Wayne resident, currently unemployed. James, thank you for being here this evening. What is your question for the candidates?
All of you seem to be against the bailouts for the large banks, yet the vast majority of economists agree that without some form of bailout, our economy would be in a much worse state. What would you have done?
And we're back to Rebecca Sink-Burris for the first response.
Many economists feel that way, and many economists feel that we could have had an orderly dissolution of those banks who had made risky loans and who had behaved irresponsibly, and that bad paper would have been bought up by sound banks, and we could have turned this around without bailing out failing banks who had been, run into the ground basically by people acting irresponsibly without using taxpayer money. And that's very important. As it was, the banks that got bailed out and the banks that didn't get bailed out, a lot of that's done for political reasons. In fact, whenever you put an issue into the political arena, it's going to be decided by who has the most political power. And those big banks, I'll just bet that a lot of them had contributed to campaigns on both sides of the aisle. and thus were able to use their influence to save themselves from their own bad choices in giving loans to people who shouldn't have been given loans, and in not looking after their customers' money the way they should have. So there's differences of opinions on whether the bailout for the banks, the TARP, was a good idea or not. And I think that time will only tell. Usually when the government gets into economics, it ends up making things worse and making recessions last longer rather than getting over with sooner.
Dan Coates?
James, I would just like to add one thing to what Ms. Sink-Burris said. Not usually, always, when government seems to get involved in administering these policies, whether they're subsidies or spending programs, it gets messed up. Bureaucracy and politics go together to make a bad cocktail. I did not support this TARP bill. I would not support this TARP bill had I been in Congress at the time. My opponent has said that I did and lobbied for someone. It's factually, actually, totally wrong. We have proved it. We have demonstrated it's available for anybody to see. But listen, bailing out, and he did vote for the bailout of Wall Street. The community banks didn't get bailed out. The big guys did. The small businesses didn't get bailed out. The big guys did. That's political power exercised at the expense, I think, of a lot of small and medium businesses. Our community banks, which have been faithful in terms of putting out good mortgages and to people who could repay those mortgages, got caught up in the same kind of regulation, same kind of issues that the big guys who made all the mistakes made. Yes, apply that to, you go after them, but don't drag everybody else in for the people that have made the abuses. So I don't think that putting all this money into government and saying, you decide, you run the auto companies. Government can't run auto companies. There are procedures in place for companies that every other company has to go through if they fail, and that's a bankruptcy.
All right, Brad Ellsworth.
Well, thank you, James. A minute and a half is a short time to talk about this. When our President George Bush came to the Congress and said, we need this money, with that look in their eye that our economy is about to go over a cliff, that requires action. No one wanted to be in that situation. But what the Congress did is then put rules on that made sure that the money would be paid back with interest, and it is. But, Mr. Coach, you can't come back to Indiana and say one thing, or say when I was there, because you weren't there. You were before, and you did lobby. If anyone cares to, go to factcheckdancoats.com. What you lobbied for, you're in your firm, for Citibank, the New York Stock Exchange, Visa, Goldman Sachs, the companies that were responsible for this. It's out of your own lobbying reports, Senator Coates. You can't say that. We've supplied the paper to everyone who's interested. And so again, I would say that it was drastic times, and our country is hurting. And when it comes time to rush in and save someone, instead of letting our economy and our pension plans and our 401ks and my mother's small savings go over the end of a cliff, then I'm willing to step in and save that. And we'll get that money back, and it'll be paid back. And we put regulations in place that'll stop it from ever happening again.
And we will now go with another one of our voter questioners. We have Deanne Ross, who is a small business owner from Indianapolis. We also thank you for making the trip this evening. What is your question for the candidates?
The health care bill contained a small provision in it for all businesses to report and submit 1099s to all of our vendors where we purchase over $600 within the fiscal year. This provision has scared many small business owners like myself because I have to wear many hats, and one of them is accounting. Trying to keep track of the fuel purchases for our company truck going on credit cards all over the state. It's just going to be a paperwork nightmare. I want to know your position on this requirement that was buried into the 2,000-page health care bill, and do you believe this section should be deleted? I know 2 attempts have been made so far, but nothing has made it through committee.
And this question goes first to Dan Coates.
Well, it is a nightmare. It shouldn't have been in there. My opponent said he read every page of that bill. That could have been taken out. Every business person I've talked to in Indiana has said this is just a nightmare. Everything I purchase, think about a hospital or a university or any other major company. the thousands of things they purchase. There's not enough warehouse space in Washington to house all the forms, or enough IRS residents to oversee those, practitioners to oversee those, the mess that this has created. And yes, Congress has failed to overturn that. Just one of the many, many, many things that are wrong with this health care bill. I just want to mention to the congressman here that he is accusing me of doing things that my law firm represented, 850 lawyers, 12 offices all across the country. I did not represent any of those companies that he mentioned for anything, let alone for the TARP. And that has been established, and that is all available for your proof. Now, that would be like me saying, Congressman, there are 435 members of Congress, 535 in the Senate, counting the Senate. You get paid by that entity, so therefore you're responsible for everything that any one of those 435 members does. You know, some of them are under ethics considerations, some of them are in jail, actually. I'm not holding you responsible for that, and I don't think you should hold me responsible for a lawyer maybe in San Francisco or Houston that works in our firm had a client I had nothing to do with.
Your time has expired. We will move now to Brad Ellsworth.
Well, thank you very much, and I will answer your question, but I will respond. Senator Coates, your lobbying firm may have 850 attorneys, but it was only 25 to 30 lobbyists. And this is right out of your own 900-page lobbying report. And you were the co-chair. That co-chair doesn't mean, like you said before, the janitor or secretary. You made $600,000 from that lobbying firm, and if they start making the co-chair, that usually indicates that you've got a position of high. And so you can't come back to Indiana and tell people that you had no responsibility or you were on the level of a secretary or janitor. We should all be looking for janitor jobs then, if they pay $600,000 a year. You're right, the bill was in there. The part you were talking about was in there. It is in there. There is legislation proposed to take that out. We'll look at that. The reason it was put in because people were trying to get around that by small increments and not reporting different parts of folks that work for them on a long basis over a year's time and not paying their adequate amount of tax. And that's why it was put in there. But I think I've co-sponsored the legislation you're talking about to remove that portion so that it doesn't unfairly hamper small business like your own.
Rebecca Sink-Burris.
If we institute the fair tax, this kind of record keeping will no longer be the monster that it is for small businesses and large businesses alike. But of course, this kind of thing does hit small business the hardest. And my opponents are from the parties of big business. Almost everything they do legislatively helps big business. They get tax breaks, they get subsidies, they get perks. It does not help small business. Almost every time it makes business harder for the small business person. And that is the most important segment of our economy. That's the segment that produces the most new jobs. That's the segment that usually is able to bring us out of recession. It's not happening right now because of rules like this that were included in the health care bill that no one, of course, knew about because we couldn't know what was in that bill until we passed it. Is that responsible governing? I don't think so. I think Congress needs to be required to read the bills before they are passed. It's just unconscionable to do it any other way. The Libertarian Party stands strong for small business. We realize how important small business is to our communities, and the fair tax is one way to really help small business by easing their paperwork nightmares.
At the microphone now is Leonard Williams. He is a college professor from here in Fort Wayne. Leonard, we thank you for joining us this evening. What is your question for the candidates?
In addition to promoting an immediate economic recovery, our nation needs substantial reinvestment in basic infrastructure. Among other things, we need to rebuild water and sewer systems, promote use of cleaner and more efficient energy systems, and develop improved communication and transportation networks. How would you recommend that these infrastructure needs be addressed? Who will do the work, and how will we pay for it?
And we go first to Brad Ellsworth.
Thank you for that question. It is very important. I think that as we look through, the first thing that this country should have done was start a capital improvement fund a long time ago. Most industrial nations do that, where they promote public and private partnerships to take on projects just like this. These are the kind of things that we put off in Washington for too long. We talk about and we keep kicking the cans down the road. It's gone on for years. I suggested instead of stimulus, let's do a highway bill. Let's figure that out and do that so that we can invest in our roads and our highways so that bridges in Minneapolis or right here in Indiana aren't falling into rivers and Americans being killed. We do have to invest in our infrastructure, in our water and sewer. No one wants to talk about it. There's nothing glamorous about a sewer job. But to the person where there's raw sewage coming up in their yard, or when someone can't turn on the faucet and get clean drinking water, that's a real problem. Those are the things we need to be concentrating on, and those will create jobs. And so as we look at Washington, D.C., we need to demand that Washington is doing just that. Capital investment in those projects, and they will create jobs.
Rebecca Sink-Burris.
Government has gotten way too big. It's gotten involved in way too many areas of our economy and of our lives. And that is a great deal of the reason why we are behind on keeping up our infrastructure. And that should be a core focus for the government, to keep that infrastructure modern and safe and updated. And yet, big government has gotten distracted and has not provided for that, has not saved for that, has not planned ahead for that. We all as individuals have to plan ahead in our lives, and yet our government fails us in that regard. I would make sure that the government sticks to its core functions, begins to shed non-core functions, and focuses our energies on these very important issues. Now, how do we do that? Well, there's many ways, but one way is to actually look at our rule book, which is the Constitution. And it does enumerate duties for the federal government and then duties that should be left to the states. And if we begin to draw back and shed functions that are not really allowed in our Constitution, we can save that money and be able to put it to these core functions of security, of keeping our borders secure, of infrastructure maintenance. And I don't believe you can count on either of the two big parties to do that. They haven't done it.
I'm going to have to cut you off there, I'm afraid. You've hit the time limit. So we'll wrap up this question with Dan Coates.
Professor, you raised the right question. We do have infrastructure issues. We have aging infrastructure, particularly in the eastern part of the country, and that needs to be addressed. But we don't have the money either at the federal level or the state level to begin to do what we need to do, because of such massive spending coming out of this government in Washington that my opponent supported, the $1 trillion health care bill that is a mess and needs to be straightened out. It does way too much. It puts government between the doctor and the patient. It was not wanted by Indiana. The governor said it would cost us $3.16 billion here in Indiana, throws away our Healthy Hoosiers program and everything else. $1 trillion on, well, a little less than $1 trillion on stimulus that didn't stimulate very much. A lot of government workers and stimulated debt, that's for sure. The bailout of the Wall Street guys who created this mess for us, and the money that went into that. Well, how are you going to have money left for the kind of essential things that need to be done? It shows way too much government in Washington, deriving us from the states of the things that money that we need to do, forcing us to pay taxes to cover, listen to this, in 20 months under this president, we have spent $3 trillion. And in the next 2 years of this president, Congress will spend another $3 trillion, driving us deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. We're loading up our children and grandchildren with debt they'll never climb out of.
And we're going to have to cut you off there. And we move now to Julie DeGate. She is a college student from Fort Wayne. Unfortunately, she could not be with us this evening, so I will read her question. What actions do you plan to take regarding clean energy, especially concerning incentives for wind energy and biofuels? And this question goes first to Rebecca Sink-Burris.
Energy is like any other commodity. It is best provided by the free market. We get the most innovation, the most variety, and the lowest cost by relying on the competition of the free market. Government has often come in and tried to pick a winner or a loser in technology, and has usually done a very bad job of it. When our technology allows, we will get new forms of energy. We need to make sure we're not standing in the way of using the energy that we have responsibly. Here in Indiana, we have a lot of coal, and we also have a problem with ozone. Well, we need to make sure that the coal we use is cleaned as much as possible, and that won't happen under cap and trade. Cap and trade would allow power companies to actually buy credits to pollute. I don't think that sounds like a good answer for Indiana. So I would like the states to work on their pollution problems and keep the federal government out of choosing winners and losers as far as power goes. Subsidies, not a good idea. That's part of picking winners and losers. It has not worked to bring us cleaner, cheaper energy. It won't work in the future.
Dan Coates.
You can get absolutely clean energy if we develop nuclear plants. We now have the technology to keep them safe. Environmentalists have kept us from going forward to do that for 30 years. It's time that we move past that, and if we want clean energy and low-cost energy, we need to develop nuclear power. We also have hundreds of years of natural gas that can be extracted from America, not shipped from overseas as oil is, that can be used. We have advantage of that, and that's a much cleaner burning fuel. We have a clean coal plant under construction down in southern Indiana, but all our other utilities in this state have spent millions, if not billions of dollars to put scrubbers on and clean up the coal residue much more than they did before. There's subsidies. We lived in Germany. Germany mandated a 20% energy source out of alternatives. The problem is politics raised its ugly hand, and every politician had to get their fair share for their state. So if you go up to the north in the Bering Sea, where the wind blows 8, 15, 20 knots steady, you see windmills turning. But every other state in Germany where the wind doesn't blow gets their share because it's subsidized of windmills. The same is true for solar. The sun shines in the south, but the people in the north, where the sun hardly ever shines, if it's 10 minutes, they run out and throw themselves in front of it. They got to have their solar. So government and subsidies and politics destroys the whole process.
And Brad Ellsworth.
To the questioner, this is not just an energy issue, it's a national security issue. And the country that has the energy revolution will be our next industrial revolution. And we're exactly right. I drive through Benton County and White County. I see those windmills up there and turbines. I get pretty excited about that, but it's not enough. I want the turbines and the engine parts to be made here in Indiana, and they're going to be in part because of the stimulus bill. We've seen companies, energy companies are going because of the stimulus bill, are starting right here in Indiana. But they're right. We have to use coal, clean coal, nuclear, wind, solar, biofuels, all the eggs in the basket we're going to use to get ourselves out of this dependence on foreign oil. I'm glad Rebecca brought up cap and trade, though. The President of the United States called me and asked me to support cap and trade legislation, and I told him no, it wasn't right for Indiana, and it wasn't right for his home state of Illinois. There's only one person on this stage that benefited financially from cap and trade. It's my opponent, Dan Coates. In his lobbying reports, I can provide them, factcheckdancoates.com, made $480,000 lobbying for cap and trade legislation on behalf of billionaire Julian Robertson, who was going to try to make more billions based on the capping and the trading. And Mr. Coates, even though he comes back to Indiana and tells Hoosiers that he's against the legislation and it would be devastating and job killer, what if it would have passed, Mr. Coates? We would have put the Americans and Hoosiers out of work based on your lobbying efforts.
Mr. Moderator, is there any opportunity to reply to a personal charge like that?
I'll tell you what, let's take 30 seconds. I'll give each of you an additional 30 seconds to make the points clearly that have been pent up about activities as it relates to lobbying or efforts to address some of those issues. And let's start with Rebecca Sink-Burris.
I'm not interested in slinging mud about who did what and when. However, I think you can easily see that the old parties are not the answer. Both of the old parties have grown government. Bush grew government And then Obama came in and just whizzed right past his records. We aren't going to be able to change the economy until we move in a different direction, and the Libertarian Party stands ready to do that.
Dan Coates?
Well, first of all, Congressman, you're wrong again. But I can understand that, you know, if somebody who went to Washington talking like a conservative here at home, but followed the agenda of Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama nearly 90% of the time, voted for TARP, voted for stimulus, voted for the health care bill, wouldn't want to come home and talk about that, but would want to deflect it and center your campaign around slinging mud. I think Mrs. Sink-Burris and I want to have an adult discussion about what this country needs and what we can do to try to help it get out of this desperate situation that it's in.
Have to cut you off
we'd
there.
like you to join us.
30 seconds for this round. I have to cut you out there. Please, please, please. We don't want to take time away from the candidates. Brad Ellsworth, 30 seconds.
You must be kidding me. You went to Washington 30 years ago. I went there 4 years ago. And you never came back home. You sold your last piece of property in Indiana in 1994. It's out of your own lobbying records that show that you were the lobbyist of Register for this gentleman and lobbied for that. I've provided it many times to members of the media and to anybody. I can show you the documentation at your own. Either you're not telling the truth or your lobbying firm is not telling the truth, and that is a violation of federal law.
Whoa.
Okay, we'll move on. We all feel better now, right? All right.
I feel good.
Who knows? Maybe the next question will lend itself to continued discussion. Evan Moore now is joining us. He is a college student from Fort Wayne. He is here tonight in the beautiful Rhinehart Music Center. Evan, what is your question for the candidates?
Good evening. If elected, what will you do in order to rewrite and enforce stricter campaign finance, reform, and congressional ethics rules?
And this goes first to Dan Coates.
I don't think any of us enjoy all the money raising that has to take place in order to run a campaign these days. It's the hardest part of campaigning. We all have to get engaged in it. I think what I would want to do to try to change that, and you got to figure out how to make it constitutional, but if we could have a law that both parties would agree with, all three parties, excuse me, would agree with, that we only accept money from Hoosiers, or the state that you represent. No outside special interest money, no money from sources outside the state. I think it would be a reflection of how well people are doing. I'm proud that the vast majority of our money is from in-state Hoosiers. I have taken money from out-of-state sources. It's part of the system right now, but if I could change it, that's what I'd like to do. That way I think it's a reflection on how the state and the supporters support the particular candidate. And I think it would reduce dramatically the cost of elections. I think it would take away the influence of these outside groups that we have no control over, that are throwing advertisements out there. So that's what I do.
Brad Ellsworth?
That's a great question, because it's getting to the point where normal people, like myself, that patrolled streets of a county here in Indiana for 25 years and come from basic means, to actually get elected to office is becoming more and more unlikely because of these funds. We've done some good ethical things in Washington, D.C. just in the last 4 years about talking about not letting special interests and lobbies. Can't buy meals, can't take funded trips, can't take rides on airplanes. That's important, and it's done, but we have to look at anything we can do to put sunshine and open the window on what goes on in Washington, D.C. to reduce the special interest for legislators. One of the things I proposed very early on, let's close the window. Let's make a pact right here in the state of Indiana and at the federal government, so that legislators, people that go, have a lifetime ban on becoming a Washington, D.C. lobbyist. Then when you go and legislate, you know there's not that door on the other end, the revolving door that needs to be closed, and it's recommended many times over. I've heard it from Democratic members and from Republican. I'm going to work here a little while, and then I'm going to go and make some real money. That's a shame. We should be going there to work for the people of Indiana, our respective states, not to line our own pockets.
Rebecca Sink-Burris.
Thank you, Evan, for that question. Money in politics is not the problem. The problem is that we are not following our Constitution and are not limiting our federal government to its enumerated powers. If we were following the Constitution, there would not be favors to buy. There would not be tax breaks and subsidies available, and that would very much take care of the problem. The fair tax I've mentioned several times because it does have many advantages, another one of which is that there would be no tax breaks, there would be no special loopholes for big business using a fair tax, and that would help with the corruption that you're talking about. But the corruption comes basically from not following the rules in the first place. And I think we very much need to get back to that. The Libertarian Party is the party of the Founding Fathers. We understand how important that Constitution is, that it's not a living document, it's a real document, and it means what it says and says what it means. And that we should not be taxing as we are. We should not be giving tax loopholes. We should not be fostering that kind of corruption. Most of the problem with campaign finance laws and the FEC is that they have really squelched free speech and made it harder for citizens to get their message out, to participate in the electoral process. And I think that's wrong.
And now at the microphone is Mary Kathleen Sendo Miller. She is from Fort Wayne. I believe you have a question for the candidates, and let me say up front, because of timing, will need to reduce this to 1 minute apiece on the response. Again, please, Mary Kathleen, your question.
Good evening. What will you be doing about the issue of gay rights?
The question, what do you believe about the issue of gay rights was the question. This goes first to Brad Ellsworth.
Well, it's a pretty broad question, and there's several segments to that. I supported the Employee Non-Discrimination Act that was put before the House. I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. As in regards to don't ask, don't tell, I would have preferred for the statement, the issue to come out, the report to come out that's due in December, but I agree with Colin Powell and Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen that if someone is willing to serve our country and put their life on the line for us, that they should be able to serve openly, that we have spent billions of dollars kicking good members of armed services out of the military and kicked out 14 or 15,000 good soldiers because of don't ask, don't tell.
Rebecca Sink-Burris.
Thank you for that question. Our government is set out to protect individual rights, and it's our government's solemn duty to treat all citizens equally, and that includes people who consider themselves to be gay. So that means we have to somehow have our system so that there are no special privileges or lack of privileges for anyone through the government. We have to have equal treatment under the law. As far as marriage goes, that means everyone needs to have a civil license that the states would enforce. If someone wants to be married in a church, that's up to them, and that's between them and their church. As far as don't ask, don't tell, I think that's a policy that is on its way out, as it should be. We've lost at least a division of valuable, trained military personnel to a misguided policy like that.
I'm afraid we're out of time on that one. Dan Coates?
I do believe marriage is a liaison between one man and one woman, and that should not be changed. I don't think anybody wants to take away rights of people for choosing a different lifestyle. I just don't think that it ranks at the same place where marriage is. It shouldn't be seen as an alternative. It's someone's choice, of course, but it should not be called marriage, and that's why I would support the Defense of Marriage Act. As far as ENDA is concerned, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, this act would violate the tenets of faith-based organizations, churches and parishes and others, synagogues, that don't want those things forced upon them, forced to hire people that don't share their personal religious beliefs. And so I think that's the wrong piece of legislation. And don't ask, don't tell. I worked to put that in place together with Democrats, signed by President Clinton, The military wanted it. I think it's, you don't just say, well, I wish we could have waited for the report, but I decided to go ahead anyway. We should have waited to hear from the military.
Afraid you're out of time on that response. All right, let's go now to Andrew Simmons. Andrew works with the American Red Cross of Northeast Ohio and is from here in Fort Wayne. I should alert the candidates that this will be the final question. So, Andrew, take it away.
All right, so I'm becoming more and more frustrated with the negative and partisan political environment in America. What do you feel that a campaign strategy based on the negative aspects of your opponent's history or the national leaders of the opposition party is better than just straight up telling Indiana voters what you truly stand for? Shouldn't a campaign be based on like why you're the best choice for Indiana and the tangible ideas that you have that will make Indiana a better place?
Dan Coates?
Yes, it should. I think what we were trying to say here today are there are issues that are important to this state and to our nation that needs to be addressed. I think Ms. Sink-Burris and I were trying to do that without getting into the back and forth ping pong match about somebody's personal engagements and particularly mischaracterizing all that. You know, this country has major problems. We're plunged into debt. The massive spending that's taking place, the agenda of this administration is taking us down absolutely the wrong track. We've got to change this. If we want to change America, we've got to change direction, and that's why I'm running. That's why I got into the race. I don't believe what's happening in Washington is what is America. I think it's putting us in a second-tier position, a debt we may never climb out of. But you know, Americans have always risen to the occasion throughout our history. And I wouldn't be in this if I didn't think that we couldn't turn it around. I have hope for the future. Maybe Ronald Reagan influenced me too much, but I believe we can return as Americans to the country that I love, the country that I served in uniform, the country that I'm trying to raise my children in and pass on the values that I learned to them. We got a big job to do, but we can't keep going down the track we're going. We're going to be bankrupt as a country. We're going to have a philosophy governing us that is a social welfare system. Europe's running from that because it doesn't work, and we're running to what they were. Why would we want to choose that model? That's what this Obama-Pelosi, supported by opponent, has been doing the last 2 years.
To Brad Ellsworth.
Well, thank you very much, and I couldn't agree more. We do need to talk about issues, but our records and our resumes are part of the issues. We can't just rewrite history, and we can't just say that my last 20 years or 30 years didn't exist. And so this isn't mudslinging, it is part, because people are making an important decision about who they're going to send to the Senate. And so again, it's not personal. I'm not talking about Mr. Coates personally or his family. I'm talking about his resume. He just talked about Obama, Pelosi, Ellsworth. That's my record. I have been in Congress. But he can't come home to Indiana and ignore that he served 18 years in the House and Senate and then went through the revolving door to a lobbying firm and then got as he characterized it, as the consolation prize to go to Germany and then come back and be a high-paid Washington lobbyist and act like that doesn't exist. He's perfectly willing to talk about my record and my votes and yet completely glosses over his own. It's not dirty, it's not mudslinging, it's part of what our resume that people have the right to know when they're making a decision in the ballot box. And the fact that I believe Mr. Coates when he talks about cap and trade and when he talks about immigration reform. But what he did when he went to the lobbying firm, and the newspaper in Indianapolis said it today, it's what lawyers do, and it's what lobbyists do. They go for whoever will pay the bill, and they assume the position of anybody that pays the bill. That's not right for Hoosiers. We need people that stand up for us, for Hoosiers, and base their decisions on what they hear at home and from the people back home and what they hear in their hearts, not based on who's paying the bills.
Rebecca Sink-Burris, please.
That's what I've tried to do throughout this campaign, is give common sense, reasonable answers. Don't be fooled this year by people who sound like libertarians when they want to get elected and have pledges and contracts with America that come to nothing. We have a two-party system in this country. The parties of big business with their two factions and the party of small government, constitutionally limited government that can return us to the prosperity that Americans deserve. It's a serious choice. Don't be fooled. The Democrats don't mind if you vote for a Republican because you're still part of the big government party. The Republicans don't mind if you vote for a Democrat because, again, you're still part of the big government party, and they can keep growing government. But if you vote for a Libertarian, that sends an absolutely unmistakable message that you have seen through the smokescreen and that you know there is no real difference between Democrats and Republicans, and that if you want to turn the country in a different direction so that we don't go off that cliff, you need to vote differently. You need to vote for Libertarian candidates this year when you go to your election
I'm afraid
booths.
I'm going to have to cut you off there, because that brings us, unfortunately, to the end of this Senate debate sponsored by the Indiana Debate Commission. Don't forget, our final U.S. Senate debate is this coming Monday, October 25th in Vincennes. For more information, go to the website, indianadebatecommission.com, and it'll have the information you need. Tonight, we offer our thanks to the candidates, to their staffs, to our broadcast partners, WFWA-TV and WYIN-TV, and to our hosts, IPFW and Chancellor Michael Wartell. Special thanks to the voters who asked questions tonight. And with that, I say thank you. Have a very pleasant evening.